It's been far more interesting than I thought it would be, I have to say. I thought this was going to be the same old, but apparently there's some movement to create some change as a result of this election. So we will see how that pans out. As I've mentioned, discussing German elections is important in part because, of course, they're going to impact Germany's relationship with Israel, which is important after all. Three of Israel's submarines, actually all of Israel's submarines, the three new submarines were built in Germany with significant subsidies from the German government. The German government helped to pay for submarines to help Israel's defense. Now, obviously, those submarines being built in Germany by German workers, they're subsidizing their own industries, but for Israel's benefit. So this will have some impact on Israel. And depending on how coalition results and talks go, there could be a chilling of relationships between Israel and Germany, especially if the left gets a stronger say in government, right? Now, also, as I've mentioned, discussing how multi-party proportional systems work gives us a better sense of how Israeli politics works. You get a bit of, a little comparison. So next time I talk about an Israeli election or coalition building process or what have you, you'll have a better sense of how it's done sort of internationally, broader sense than just this is how Israel does it. Germany has tended to have large parties, and for a long time, Germany was basically a three-party system. You had the CDU, the SPD, and the FDP, right? So the CDU is the Christian Democrats, center-right, not right-wing in an American sense. Actually, for most of the time up to this point in Germany, I would have compared the CDU more to the Democrats than any other American political party. But the SPD is the red left-wing party. They're distinctly more left in their leanings, socialist in their approach to government. Also, the FDP, the Free Democrats, are the neoliberals, or what's called, neoliberal in Europe. Now, I think this is kind of funny because liberal means something very different here in America. And one of my friends who came over from Germany was complaining. He was at a Republican Party meeting that I happened to be attending, and he looks over to me and he says, "Isaac, when I tell people that I'm a neoliberal, they look at me funny, like I'm something's wrong with me. What's going on?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, just say you're with the Free Market Party, because in America, liberal means something different." Although, we've traded this negativity around the word liberal, and I think it's a little bit uncalled for at this point. I consider myself a working class liberal. It's how I was raised, and as far as I'm concerned, that's still where I'm at. Even though what was liberal then is now on the right in American politics, as far as I see. So, like Ronald Reagan, it's not that I left a particular party, but that party left me. So, in any case, the neoliberal free market, pro-business, pro-free enterprise, economically conservative, we might say in an American sense, political party is the FDP, the Free Democrats. There's also Die Linke, which is far left party that is formed basically to protest because the SPD, the center left party, has been forming coalitions with CDU, what are called unity governments between the two larger parties, and so they're out there kind of protesting to the left. And then there's Alternative for Deutschland, and AfD is an anti-immigration party. Germany's been flooded with immigrants from Syria recently, especially, but also from other parts of the Middle East, and Germans are rightly concerned about this. There's a lot of vandalism of churches and synagogues. There's been a great rise in anti-Semitic violence and anti-Christian violence, and there are many cities in Germany now where women cannot walk out at night, late at night, because they are not safe. There's been a lot of rape and murder, unfortunately. All predictable. You might say somebody warned them, but that's the unfortunate situation with European politics. To say anything against that is to be racist and fascist and neo-Nazi and all this kind of thing, when in fact it's just seeking to protect your own communities. All right, so final results being in. Germany's Bundestag, the lower house, does not have a fixed number of seats. They predicted there would be about 730 seats, but it also depends on voter turnout and this kind of thing. So ultimately, there were 735 seats. So 368 seats constitutes a majority, right? You have to have 368 to govern the country. So of the election results, the SPD, led by Olaf Scholz, the finance minister, current finance minister, won 206 seats with 25.7% of the vote. Not a great result. SPD has, when they've won in the past, like when they, for example, when they were led by Willy Brandt, in those days, they did much better than this. Okay, but they have come out just 1.6, a little over 1.5% ahead of CDU, the Christian Democrats, who've been leading for the past 16 years, the past 4 elections. For the past 16 years, Angela Merkel of CDU has been the chancellor. And they've had their poorest result since the end of the Second World War. That just tells you where CDU is right now. Angela Merkel has destroyed CDU. That's basically the headline from this election based on the results. With 24.1% of the vote, they have 196 seats. Grüne, the Green Party, has 118 seats, 14.8%. FDP has 92 seats, 11.5%. AFD has 83 seats with 10.3%. Die Linke has 39 seats with 4.9%. So this is the election result. All right. As I've described before, like within Israel, you have right blocks and left blocks, and you start this coalition building process. Usually in Israel, we have this thing where, because there are so many parties, the parties recommend one leader to start forming a coalition. And I talked about this back when the Israeli election took place, in, I think, episode 15 or 16, where the greater number of members of the Knesset, the incoming Knesset, the parties with the greater number of votes total, recommended Bibi Netanyahu to form a coalition. Well, in Germany, generally speaking, the party that wins is seen as the leaders in forming a coalition. Something different is happening this time around, and this is an amazing thing, and I'm really excited to talk about it because these are things that just don't happen in multi-party proportional systems generally. And that is that the Green Party and the FDP have already begun preliminary negotiations toward forming a coalition amongst themselves. They're two of the smaller parties, and together they could make either SPD or CDU the kingmaker. They're the kingmaker to both of those. One of those parties could end up leading the country if this group sided with them. And that's what's being called the Citrus Coalition. In Germany, I think I mentioned last time, they have clever ways of talking about building coalitions based on the party colors, right? So the FDP, their color is yellow, and the Grüne Party obviously is green, right? So green and yellow, that's the Citrus Coalition, because those are the citrus colors. And that gives them the opportunity to choose either the Stoplight Coalition, which would be, with SPD, right? Red, yellow, green. Stoplight. So that's kind of a funny way to talk about that coalition. Or the Jamaican coalition that Angela Merkel could not form 4 years ago, which would be CDU. The black is the color for CDU, and green and yellow. And that's called the Jamaican coalition because the Jamaican flag has black, green, and yellow on the Jamaican flag, right? So they call that the Jamaican coalition, and obviously the Stoplight coalition is red, green, and yellow. That is fascinating. So Christian Lindner and his party and are talking, the FDP, that is, the Free Market Party, are in negotiations with Grüne, which is led by Annalena Baerbock, and they're together, they have 210 seats, right? That's a significant portion of the 368 needed for a majority. And they could form a coalition with either of the two major parties, considering that SPD's 206 or CDU's 196 would be enough. Now, considering that SPD just gained 1.6% more votes than CDU, it would be reasonable and logical to suggest that the citrus parties, once they've reached an agreement amongst themselves, might choose SPD as the leader of the government just because they gained the upper hand in the election. And for the Green Party, that would be somewhat beneficial because the Green Party is left, right? And so SPD would be a left party leading the coalition, and basically the Free Democrats then would be sort of the right-wing counterweight the balance to the coalition, that would keep the coalition from being too far left. And the too far left part is the part that impacts Israel. If, let's say, you had a coalition, and thankfully there aren't enough seats among the left-wing parties to do this, but if you had a coalition that was, say, SPD and Green and Die Linke, the far left party, which is represented by the color purple. So if you had a red, green, purple coalition, perish the thought, that would be very bad for Israel. That would mean a serious chilling of relations between Germany and Israel. Now, I don't need to tell you that Germany and France rule the European Union with an iron fist. I mean, what happened to Greece a few years ago should be an example for everyone. Germany basically took over the Greek government and forced policies on the Greek. It was just like the German invasion of Greece in 1941, but this time without the tanks. Germany basically invaded Greece politically and forced the Greek to adopt certain economic policies. Now, those were sound economic policies that will help Greece recover economically and bring back their economy so that they'll be able to repay the debts that they owe Germany, granted. But I'm of the mind that democracy should have prevailed. If the Greek want to continue to elect far-left governments and they don't want to adopt sound, sane, rational economic policies, then they deserve the privation and starvation that follow. I hate to say this, but it's one of those things. Like if you don't want to work, you deserve to be hungry. It's different if you can't. I mean, there are people who are disabled or for whatever reason they are not able to work. That's a different scenario. But if you are able-bodied, able-minded, and able to go to work and you choose not to, that's not my problem. Okay? So again, I'm not saying that the Greek left-wing governments were right, but if the Greek themselves had voted for political parties that were going to adopt the German policies, that would have been one thing. In any case, Germany dominates the EU. All right, so if there were a chilling of relations between Germany and Israel, that would mean a chilling of EU relations between Europe and Israel. A chilling between Germany and Israel. So this is an important change here. This is important to what's going on, and a traffic light coalition would be okay. It might be just a little bit chillier toward Israel than Angela Merkel's was, but SPD has been part of the government, successive governments with Angela Merkel. 3 of the last 4 governments were between SPD and CDU. So I don't expect a significant shift to take place in terms of relations between Israel, especially with a traffic light coalition, because the FDP, while Israel is not one of their primary issues, they're very pro-trade. And so obviously the biggest concern we have here is, would the European Union continue to would they go in the BDS direction and start to isolate Israel economically? Even small changes can make a huge bit of difference. Israel's agriculture products, their technology services, a lot of their goods that they manufacture go to Europe. And, Israel doesn't trade that much with its neighbors, right? The Arab countries are slowly opening themselves to trade with Israel, but that's a slow process. And their economies outside of the production of oil are relatively small compared to Europe. So Israel needs European consumers. Now, Israel also trades quite a bit with the United States and with American consumers, but still, Europe is really important to the Israeli economy, and Germany sets the tone for Europe. So we'll see how this shakes out. Traffic light coalition, Jamaica coalition, who knows? I'm not a great fan of Armin Laschet, the leader of CDU. I really don't think he should be chancellor. The guy is, he's for whatever's good for him politically, and he's against whatever's bad for him politically. He doesn't have any kind of, I want to say, moral backbone, moral fiber. He's just a pure politician. And if they were led by someone like Mr. Söder from Bavaria, who would be a much stronger leader for CDU and someone who would really represent the right, I would be more favorable toward that. However, if Söder were leading the CDU, there'd be a lower likelihood that the Green Party would be willing to work with them. So what's behind all of this? What's going on here? The Green Party is an environmental party, but I think we in the West misunderstand the Green movement a little bit. While the Green movement is very environmentalist, they also try to balance that with being pro-working class. There's a distinct communism right? Green is the new red. There's a distinct leftism. And in Europe, the leftism tends to favor workers a little bit more than it does here in America. American lefties say that they favor workers, but then they adopt policy after policy that destroys the working class, right? High taxes. We saw a lowering of corporate taxes in 2019 that meant a massive expansion of the workforce and rising wages for the first time in decades in America. That was where we were in 2020 before the lockdowns. We had a vast increase in prosperity among Americans, average Americans. That was a reversal of decades of bad policy making that harmed working class workers, right? And now they're talking about raising taxes, right? Well, so the Green Party balances their green enthusiasm, their zealousy for greenness with support for working class. They balance the green with the red, let's say. And so the main things the Green Party really wants right now is less dependency on Russia. A lot of people are concerned because Angela Merkel has shut down Germany's nuclear plants and has made Germany more dependent on Russian oil and gas, right? And Russia loves that, because if Russia has something they can hold over Germany, they have something they can hold over the EU as a whole, right? Vladimir Putin is very eager to get any kind of edge, any leverage he can pull on anyone, right? So the Greens are not for that. On the other hand, they do want to move Germany off of coal-burning energy. Well, there are options there, natural gas and that sort of thing, and they can buy that natural gas from the United States, unfortunately at a premium to Russian gas. But if they could buy a certain amount of American LNG, liquefied natural gas, that can be shipped over there, we're already shipping LNG to Eastern Europe, for example, then they can counterbalance their dependency on Russia and thus weaken Vladimir Putin's leverage. And then they could come to a situation where if he, for example, decided to cut off the gas to try to force Europe to adopt a certain policy or to coerce the Germans into doing something for him, then Germany could just say, well, we'll just buy more gas from America and life is good, right? Israel's about to enter the natural gas business as well with pipeline to Europe, and that would allow Israel to prosper a little too. So the Greens are kind of in that situation. They're anti-Russia, which is kind of interesting. The left wing, I thought it was kind of funny. I have to share this joke with you because it's been passing around among my circle of friends and my dear wife that, with the Green Party, with Annalena Baerbock, that there's this left-wing vegetarian German leader who's anti-Russia, right? Should we be scared, right? Hopefully she won't grow a Charlie Chaplin mustache and start screaming a lot on the radio and on TV. But it is kind of a funny thing, we're kind of in the midst of an internal conflict in Spain that involves Russia and the European Union over the desired independence by regions like Castile, and and in the meantime, right, and Catalonia and this kind of thing, and in the meantime we have this going on in Germany. Anyway, there are some fun parallels to situations that existed 90 years ago. Anyway. So Green is anti-Russia. The FDP wants to develop the German economy as much as it can, obviously. And so if they can work that out, then that'd be a pretty good counterweight. And then if they join a coalition with the SPD, then Olaf Scholz will be chancellor, and the FDP and Grüne will have a strong influence on the German political system. That's probably the best they're going to get. If they decided to go with this Jamaican coalition, moving away from SPD, they're going to need some kind of some kind of excuse because SPD won the election. So they'll have to say, well, we tried to negotiate with SPD and they won't work with us. So there would have to be some kind of excuse, right? Because the voters did give SPD a little bit more confidence than CDU. And CDU lost this. I mean, this was their election to lose, and CDU lost it. Right? Armin Laschet was a bad choice for leader, and Angela Merkel has absolutely destroyed the CDU, the Christian Democrats in Israel, or in Germany, over the past 16 years that she's been chancellor. So glad to see her go, though. I'm looking forward to anyone being chancellor other than Merkel, and I think people in Germany are too. This has happened before. Helmut Kohl was elected in 1982, and for 16 years he was chancellor, and ultimately he was charged with corruption and bribery charges, and convicted of those later on after he left office. But as I've said before, with the reunification of Germany circa 91, 92, and all of that going on, as they got into 1994, it kind of made sense for him to seek a fourth term in office with a lot of big things happening in Germany at the time. So I'll say that much. But for Angela Merkel, there really was no excuse for her to have a fourth term. And if Martin Schulz hadn't sacrificed his career at SPD, who was a promising alternative to Angela Merkel for a while there, if he hadn't sacrificed his political career and joined SPD in a fourth coalition, the third SPD CDU, but anyway, by joining another unity government, he had to resign as the political leader of SPD, thus sacrificing his political career. Political suicide, right? And SPD joined with Merkel for one more term. And that's why now it's less likely that SPD would look to a unity government with CDU if there were a viable alternative, which the citrus parties, Grüne and FDP, are working on. So we'll see how that hammers out in the future. But now I think you have a good flavor of how multi-party proportional politics can work. Some really interesting and different things happening over in Germany. So we'll see how that goes.